This is what I call this reestablishing of the relationship to the Gaian mind. This is what the ego blocks us from, is this relationship to nature as though it were a kind of partner and a companion. You know, the whole problem with the modern situation, I mean, earlier I defined it as ego. Here's then a behavioral definition of it. Our problem is that we cannot feel the consequences of what we're doing. We can talk about the spread of AIDS, the ozone hole, the toxification of the ocean, but if we could emotionally connect with it and feel, we would have the political reformation we're waiting for later this evening. So, and what you're talking about, I think, is the feeling that comes when nature is suddenly perceived to be vibrant, alive, full of an intent to communicate, and caring of humanity. Women, I think, are closer to this than men, but in the context of our civilization, we're also screwed up that comparing the differences between men and women in regard to that hardly matters. We have to re-empower our emotions. We've gone way out of line in terms of the rational mind and have completely deadened our emotional receptors to the consequences of what we're doing.
Yes. There's one thing you mentioned earlier about conspiracy theory, and not subscribing to that directly.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last.
You had mentioned about conspiracy theory and not subscribing to it directly as a theory, and I can appreciate that. But I think we have to look at it in more detail and maybe from some other angles to get more out of that. Maybe the terminology doesn't fit. But in the 60s, having lived through that era, we, I think, really touched on what democracy could be. It really was a different relationship between people for a short period of time. And I remember how it dissolved as the 60s went on and the 70s came, and what we've all experienced to the remainder of the 70s into the 80s and now the 90s. I think it's been very dramatic change. I think that to subscribe that it's happenstance would be folly. To say completely that the CIA, as an example, although I have no information and don't even want to have it, tested something and then let it go because it didn't fit their needs completely, may not be the whole story. For example, you talked about drugs, natural especially, but drugs in general can be inhabited as time goes on by those who experience it. And let's say, for example, as a theory, that those who experienced that democracy early in the 60s were inhibited from further experiencing, were disassociated from it by safe houses, by whatever systems were developed, such that those drugs could be inhabited in a different way over a period of time. Rather than resulting in democracy, perhaps they result in Brave New World or some system of control. It seems to me like there may be a theocracy rather than a democracy that's ruling, and that there may be a thought process that is guiding. And one of the reasons we see these, when we look inside of these institutions like the Center for Disease Control, the National Institutes of Health, the White House, one of the reasons we see these bungling people is because those are the only people who really can fill these roles. Not because there is nothing of intelligence behind that's guiding them. And when I say intelligence, I don't mean positive intelligence. So I feel like we have to, or it would be helpful for us to keep in touch with the idea of something going on, something guiding and counter-guiding. That, as you said about evolution earlier, that evolution really is the moving toward a goal. I think that those who plan for 500 years in the future, and there are people that do that, and those that may have a theocracy may see that goal and not want that. They may not want the free use of materials on this planet to flow freely between all people. Once that happens, you have whatever democracy truly is. I mean, even that would transform to a new word, a new name. So I feel there is something going on. I feel that psychedelics do allow one to penetrate through the veils that are created. I think that's why they're detrimental. That's why they're a quote-unquote controlled substance. You know, in the medical schools and in the research field, the reason there's so much cowardice and fear is because people lose their jobs. Literally, they don't even know why they lost them. If you go to the UCLA Medical School library and read in some of the more technical journals on synthesis and other areas related to this, you will find in the corners of the book people's notes about what their experiences were. That's the source of information. That's where it's being spread. It's the only channel open. There are people all across this nation and elsewhere trying to do things. They have no avenue, and if they step out, they're cut off. Same way as in cancer therapy, the same way as in other areas where this powerful dynamic life that we are could emerge. I think it's a theocracy behind it, something that's known. So I just wanted to present
Well,
that.
I think there are a lot of groups, let's say, that aspire to control society. I just don't think anybody is succeeding. I don't think that the world we're living in is the result of anybody's conscious agenda. To take LSD, for example, and again, I always go back to Occam's razor. The simplest explanation for what happened to the psychedelic revolution in the 60s is that it self-corrupted itself. It didn't require the CIA to ruin it. When you have a situation where a graduate student in biochemistry and his roommate with a trust fund can get together and pool their money and intelligence and over a long weekend produce 5 or 10 million hits of LSD in a small apartment, what you are going to get out of that is criminal syndicalism, pyramidal organizations for the purposes of making money. And that is clearly what destroyed LSD. I mean, I lived through it. The San Francisco Oracle and people like that were pleading, don't sell acid. Give it away. Give it away. As long as you give it away, it will be pure. And some people weren't interested in enlightenment. Some people wanted, houses in the hills and Maseratis. So it is our own nature that conspires against us, not the dreams of the CIA. I mean, don't forget, George Bush once ran the CIA, for God's sake. That's the level of competence that agency can get together.
That's the first one of the CIA witnesses behind that, because I don't think we are that intelligent. So that doesn't mean there isn't intelligence that exists that can do that. I think that's...
But why hypothesize it if there's no evidence for it? Well, people decided they wanted to make money on it.
They're going to develop newer and stronger and longer lasting psychedelics to replace that. There was a constant move away from more of the psychedelic experience to more of it became very destructive. And I don't think it was primarily financial.
What was it primarily? Control of what?
Well, as you would yourself would say, if something went longer than you expect, you get away to lose control completely. Like what was the long FCC?
But these things were distributed in micro-cultures relative to the global situation. I mean, I don't deny that there are people who seek to subvert the natural development of the social agenda. I just think that it's an impossible proposition. I mean, the real conspiracies are the Catholic Church, the World Bank, the IMF, and they don't think of themselves as conspirators. They think of themselves as 1,000-year-old organizations, not in the case of the IMF, but
the organizations that simply are allowed to receive the grant money to do what they're supposed to do.
say what?
They're the ones that decide. Oh, they don't. They decide they're eliminating.
Those of us that listen to...
Well, Richard has the talking.
So those that listen to KPFK in the middle of the night on Wednesday night get the full loathe conspiracy stories from Dave Emery. And I think actually there's a lot to be listened to very carefully in terms of the evidence that he has gathered about this.
But don't you think, Richard, that even if, we could almost say, even if all these conspiracies exist, we're hearing about so many that they must be self-canceling?
Well, it's coming to crisis moment in terms of the massive cover-up versus the keep uncovering this and uncovering that, and they just can't keep their fingers on every part of the dike.
Yeah, I think running a world-controlling conspiracy must be a fairly frustrating enterprise these days. I'm getting the high sign from the tapers. Let me...
Listen, I just want to speak to this lady's concern about LSD. LSD was used in the 60s for alcoholic rehabilitation very successfully.
Single doses.
And only, when the government put its thumb on LSD research was this stopped. But they had tremendous success with LSD in recovering alcoholics in straight psychiatric hospitals. So there is that evidence out there.
There has to be an overcoming of the institutionalized fear that is exported into the society. The news is the psychedelic dimension represents a new world. And, we can go into it and enslave the Indians, or we can go into it and save our souls. And it's going to be guided and controlled, I think, by the informed decisions of rational individuals. And it's up to each and every one of us to make sure that we fall into that category. This is the best kept secret on this planet. It is your birthright, as much your birthright as the sexual experience, but more easily evaded, more easily distorted. And so there's a certain responsibility on each of us to try and educate and inform ourselves and then integrate it into our lives. We no more know what it's for than we know what electricity or wind is for. It can be used for all kinds of things. It can be used to distort human nature or to unfold it into some kind of incredible and amazing future. These things used to be called consciousness-expanding drugs. Well, now suppose for a moment that were actually true, that that's what they do. If consciousness does not loom large as a part of the human future, then what kind of future is it going to be? If these things really empower consciousness, self-reflection, boundary dissolution, and creative ideation, then we must fully explore them, because we are on the brink of extinction because of a failure of creativity, a failure to creatively meet the challenges that history, our own history, has created for ourselves. We have to claim our birthright. Nobody can take this away from you any more than they can take away your right to have sex or breathe air or drink water. And anybody who tells you that this is an item up for social manipulation and control is somehow serving a dominator agenda that diminishes and degrades every single member of the human family. It is a true mystery. It's a doorway out of the dead end of Western history. It's the return path backward to the shamanic paradise that existed before history. If you don't believe what I'm saying, do the rational thing. Check it out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.